Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Douglas. I'm the head of the Asian Urbanisms Cluster at the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore, which brings you this event in collaboration with the National Library Board. Let me tell you a little bit about ARI, and then I'll introduce our speakers. The Asia Research Institute, which we call ARI, was established in July 2001 as one of the strategic initiatives of the National University of Singapore. Its mission is to provide world-class research on and in Asia. In addition to our researchers, we provide for postdoctoral research, visiting scholars, conferences, seminars, and outreach programs such as this. This particular event, Asia Trends, is one of our, we call our flagship public outreach events. It's annual, so we have different clusters. So there's Urbanism Cluster, which I'm part of, holds one of these once a year, which we try, and indeed tonight very successfully so, to get a renowned scholar to talk to you about something that's of importance today. Our effort is to bring cutting-edge research to Singapore, to anyone in Singapore who wants to come and join us in conversation. The way we'll proceed tonight is we'll have our speaker and then a discussant, and then we'll sit around afterwards and ask and answer questions that you might have. Let me introduce our main speaker tonight, Professor Kees Christiaens. Studied architecture and urban planning at the University of Technology in Delft. In 1989, he founded his own office, his own company, Kees Christiaens Architects and Planners, known as KCAP, or if you're Indonesian, KCAP, I'm told. Okay, since 2002, his office has expanded beyond the Netherlands into Shanghai and into Zurich. And from late 1990s until early 2000s, he taught architecture, urban planning at the University of Technology in Berlin, and then moved to Zurich at the ETH, one of the leading international universities for technology and natural sciences. In 2009, just to give you an example of the kinds of things that Kees does, he was a curator of the International Architecture Biennial in Rotterdam, entitled Open City Designing Coexistence. For about past 4 years, hasn't it been? So over the last 4 years, since 2011, Kees has been the program leader of the Future Cities laboratory in Singapore and principal investigator, as well as module leader for the Module 4, Urban Design Strategies and Resources. That's in U-Town, University Town in the US. Next to his work as an architect, Kees focuses on urban assignments in complex situations and guiding urban processes. His expertise is quite wide-ranging. I was looking up on the web, and I just was going page after page to see what was happening. One of his activities was the new rural and global agriculture. Is that correct? And then he also has been working in declining neighborhoods, and I think he's going to talk to us about how the Olympics in London figures into that. On a personal note, and I'm the person who actually got to invite Kees to come, I've been to several of his lectures, and what really attracted me above and equal to, I should say, all of his professional expertise is in every occasion he shows a deep humanity and caring for the people who live in the city. That the people should be for, the city should be for the people who live in those cities. And so, with that inner compass that he has, I think it's guided him very well in his professional life. And I'm very pleased to welcome Kees to us, and please come forward and speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for this human introduction. Normally I speak free, but I want to be a little precise. Also, because I'm afraid of Li Min asking me questions. So I'm going to read this text and guide you through some thoughts. These thoughts are the beginning of a research that we want to start in the next phase of the Future Cities Laboratory from next year onwards. In The City as an Egg, Cedric Price, British architect, brilliant metaphor for the evolution of the city, the urban condition in the 1990s is depicted as scrambled eggs. See it on the right side. Medieval city, boiled egg, city of the 18th century, fried egg when the walls were taken down and the 19th century neighborhoods and industrialization started. Scrambled eggs, the condition all over the world, maybe except for Singapore. In these scrambled eggs, the fragments of egg yolk distributed across the egg white represent multiple centers of the city. Price may have been inspired by another egg diagram, by Patrick Abercrombie's social and functional analysis map from 1943. He made that during the Second World War, where London is represented as a conglomerate of eggs representing neighborhoods, as autonomous and functional parts of an extended organism. In Orwell's sense, all eggs are equal, but some eggs are more equal than others. Abercrombie saw the city as both hierarchical, that means there's a city center and the neighborhoods around it are less important, but also as egalitarian, an organism in which some eggs develop into more important centralities or central places than others. In this, he may have been on his turn inspired by Walter Cristaller, who made this system of central places in 1934, working for Nazi Germany, which also used egg shapes to represent overlapping spheres of influence between cities and villages located in the transnational nexus between Strasbourg, Zurich and Munich. You see on the far left Strasbourg and on the far right Munich, and down you see Zurich. When our firm KCAP or KCAP became part of the design team for the Olympic Masterplan, the Legacy Masterplan in London, we modified Patrick Abercrombie's diagram by adding the Olympic Park as a new centrality. You see on the right, top above right, a new colored ensemble along the Lee Valley on the edge of the city in East London, complementary to the city centre, the West End and the estates. Big projects like this, if I go back, you see here the Olympic Games, and here you see the master plan for the legacy after the Olympic Games. A very interesting concept, a little bit taken from Barcelona, have become a common praxis in urban governance in many cities, where they are the result of pragmatic reactions to the uncontrollability of the city or of a conscious strategic intervention. Therefore, I find it relevant to discuss their significance and their instrumentality as an urban design strategy in different contexts. We will look into projects in London, in Hamburg, in Shenzhen and Singapore, half Europe and half Asia. The Olympic Park project marks a shift in paradigm from several perspectives. Taking some lessons from Barcelona, as I said, the project's main idea is to channel the enormous effort and investment for this only 3-week sports event as much as possible in a sustainable development framework for the future. Further, the choice of the site itself is a significant statement of urban regeneration, aiming at bridging the gap between central and East London. You see on the left picture, you see a black gap along the River Lee from north to south. That was where the legacy site was projected. And on the left you see West London, and on the right East London, completely separated from each other. So we create a new centre and park in between, while at the same time stimulate urban renewal in the adjacent boroughs. The project clearly acknowledges that the contemporary city is essentially polycentric, and that complementary centralities create a system of orientation and may generate mediating scaling effects between the level of the agglomeration of the whole city and the local context. The real challenge of the assignment was to transform an enormous gated community, which is the Olympic Games, as you see in the lower diagram on the left, into an open city, a so-called Olympic Park, with a multi-directional street and public space system connecting the boroughs of East and Central London. A master plan was designed with the Lee Valley, formerly a polluted industrial canyon, as a central park zone in which several of the games venues were integrated as public amenities. It's very important, on the left-hand side you see the site with its different Olympic venues that are completely closed off from each other and have a kind of tree-like access system in which they are connected to the surrounding boroughs. And on the right-hand side you see the concept of laying an open street grid in two directions across the whole site and create embedded neighborhoods of different character that form a mediating relationship between the east part of London and the west part. So if you look how this transformation takes place from the Olympic mode, which you see here, into the future neighborhood, we devised an incremental phasing system in which gradually first the pedestrian area was turned into a park, this enormous pedestrian paved surface that had to accommodate millions of sports visitors, turned in a park, and consequently create the neighborhoods that would grow out of this park, connect to the surrounding. The urban center of the Olympic Park is formed by Stratford Centre, a fusion of the old core of the borough, a new shopping centre, and a transport hub with a high-speed Eurostar station, underground connection, and the Docklands line trail. In compliance with London's organic character, the Olympic Park was not designed as a geometrical, finished Beaux-Arts design, but as a development framework with dense mixed-use neighborhoods in an open public space system, dividing street blocks within which certain freedom and diversity of development is envisaged. That's why we also drew the scheme up in a model that was white, depicting block and building typologies rather than specific elements of elaboration, in order to show the diversity and flexibility that would be able to develop in terms of functions as well as in terms of architecture within such a framework. Eventually, the Olympic Park may naturally integrate into the constellation of nearby central places like the Royal Docks, London City Airport, the O2 Event Dome, Greenwich, the Isle of Dogs, etc. Where Canary Wharf, you see Canary Wharf in the top right, gradually turns from an autistic compound into an urban catalyst attracting urban functions and new housing complexes. So you see between this Olympic scheme and this Canary Wharf a vital difference. The Olympic scheme was consciously designed and in political sense conceived of using the investment and the energy of an international sport event in favor of urban renewal, and the design and the development plan for this scheme was explicitly a framework with the idea that it could incrementally grow and be filled with diverse functions, with neighborhoods of different color into the future. Whereas Canary Wharf is one of the kind of devils of London from the 1960s and 70s. It's a so-called monster urban mega project, which was put there by a Canadian investor as a new business center in order to simply invest. And in some or other way, the weakness of the London government allowed the construction of this site, consisting of enormous towers with enormous floor plates that consequently could only house headquarters of banks and so on. It became later one of the financial centers of London. The Lehman Bank that crashed in 2008 was part of this Canary Wharf. But let's say because of its long life and its function as a centrality, it consequently attracted housing, amenities, and other things around it, neutralizing the autistic and monstrous characteristic that this development has. And that's quite interesting because we see that in the course of the last 50 years, these urban mega projects, which I call Grand Projèts because they are a special type of urban mega projects, namely high density inner city projects, mostly connected to transit, are having an evolution from being hardcore monofunctional, business-like oriented, into more projects that try to revitalize the city by their sheer concept and development. And this is an aspect that I think is so important that we should work on this. So we were also once asked by the Canary Wharf Development Company, how would you see the extension of this project without giving in on the density? And we did some studies for them, of which one is this one. And you see that we created proposals that created a block structure of city blocks as a plinth and a podium where lively functions are in, with a clear street grid, on top of which towers were allowed to be built according to a certain regulation. Towers that were much smaller and much more slender than the monsters, the white monsters that you see in the back, because these white monsters on this moment are very difficult to rent out. They have been built for a certain period of banking activity and financial activity, and on this moment their surfaces are very difficult to rent out, and so we proposed to them to build smaller high-rises that would be able to swap between living and working. We did some realizations in this sense in the city center of Rotterdam, where you see this cluster of high-rises that are very small and slender and are positioned on top of existing housing fabric and office fabric. It was intended to create enough critical mass to renovate existing buildings and consequently attract new life in the city, and also increase the amount of dwellings and inhabitants in the city center of Rotterdam. So this principle was projected onto Canary Wharf. But the mother of all of these projects, maybe, is La Défense in Paris. One of the early financial districts in Europe, planned in 1958. Because it lies beyond the boulevard périphérique, and at the same time still participates in the old plan of Haussmann in Paris, a statement that the city is a polycentric agglomeration and that working on complementary centers to create coherence on a regional scale constitutes an urban strategy. Furthermore, because La Défense does not constitute a strictly controlled composition of building volumes in public spaces, it operates as a loose framework, allowing a certain leeway for individual projects and also for small-scale economic activity and housing to be built in its vicinity. You see in this picture the core of La Défense, where this square arch is, standing in the axis of the Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe. This was the original CBD for Paris in 1958, but you see at the same time that around it a certain concentration of buildings has emerged, and this has triggered a centrality evolution with an enormous amount of additional mixed use on top of this monofunctional development that we originally saw. We are in the process of realizing a very big Grand Projèts, if you like, the Haven City in Hamburg, one of the largest waterfront developments on the European continent, and for me an essential experience prior to my engagement in London, where we calibrate the urban design in terms of a double reading. You can namely say, you see here in this photograph from the air, you see this whole Haven City project, you see that it is about 50% realized. It lies directly in front of the city center on the river Elbe. And you can say that you can read it upscale in an exogenous way, and you can read it downscale at the same time. Upscale, the Haven City is a new centrality in the agglomeration of Hamburg, in a city of multiple centers, establishing relationships with strong urban identities like the city center, St. Pauli, and other neighborhoods. And downscale, if you look at the plan of the Haven City project itself, it consists of several quarters and landmarks forming a universe in itself. You see, for instance, in the middle, this vertical canal is the center, which has a specific density and mixed use other than the fingers between the basins and along the harbor on the other side. So you could say we have to do with these projects, when they function right, with a kind of matryoshka doll concept that creates a clear hierarchy, but it also enables the subsidiary centers to emancipate upscale to the city level, with the result that the Haven City as an entity blends more into the background. So if the Haven City is the blue doll, you can read it upscale on the level of the city, but you can also read it downscale to the different quarters that are in the Haven City. For instance, the Überseestadt, which is this part of the center of the Haven City that is not completed yet. The Haven City's dense mixed-use heart, here you see a model, has a direct pedestrian link to the town hall square of Hamburg, might in the future become a strong centrality with a larger urban territory, or even the Chicago Square, which you see on the right hand of the Haven City, where those bridges are, which is a kind of high-rise concentration as a gateway to the city. can also become one of these centralities within the quarters of the haven city. For such an openness to occur, we as urban designers need to design a strong tissue of connecting public spaces as a basic framework, as an essential. In Haven City, which you see here, a part of the realized park, the Haven City quays along the harbor basins form the base for the public space structure, which extend along a fine network of streets, squares and parks to enable a high level of accessibility between neighborhoods. The ends of the piers are reserved for public landmarks, including the iconic Alp Philharmonic building by architects Herzog and Dömeron, on top of an old warehouse, a project that almost bankrupted the city. But this robust framework of public spaces defines city blocks, as you see, in which a diversity of architecture and program unfolds. The basic urban typology in the Haven City is a perimeter block. Depending on the context, it mutates into a range of disparate forms. When oriented towards the water, the block opens up into an L or a U shape, as you can see on the left side along the quay. And in the Überseestadt that I just showed you the model of, where only active street fronts and no malls or covered streets are allowed, would not be possible here, it turns into a dense commercial block. When skyline or transparency is desired, it becomes a tower, as in front of the Spijkerstad or in the form of this Philharmonic building. And so the Haven City simultaneously allows for considerable architectural diversity while maintaining a clear overall coherence. The secret of this incremental diversity does not lie so much in what you see, but it lies in the process of implementation. Every block, except for the center which I showed you and therefore had also difficulties of being implemented, is tendered as one single competition between investors and architects. Plots are only handed over when building permits are acquired, ensuring a steady stream of realizations. Successive land sales finance the construction of roads, public space and infrastructure, and are expected to be break-even in the end of the whole affair. So every block is handed over to a developer, and the condition, for instance, is that at least 3 buildings or 4 buildings are realized within a block. One block, one building, like you, for instance, see very much in Asian buildings, which are also meant to create malls, are forbidden in the Haven City, exactly in order to prevent large-scale buildings that have hardly any entrances in the townscape. Looking at the Haven City after 10 years of work, it is astonishing how urban and diverse the area has become in a relatively short time. The early success of the Haven City is not only due to its highly attractive waterfront site within easy walking distance of the city center. In contrast to other waterfront developments like the Amsterdam Eastern Docklands, for instance, which consists mainly of housing and public amenities, the Haven City contains hotels, schools, international corporate headquarters, home offices, shopping, as well as neighborhood shopping, museums, theaters, a university even, and a cruise terminal. And this set against a 50% residential program of luxury as well as affordable apartments. The carefully planned mixed-use policy and the emerging diverse morphology actually are a fairly accurate reflection of the contemporary network economy, where distinct social groups desire customized building, incremental and adaptive growth potentials, multiple and easily accessible services, and links between brainwork and production. This attitude of control and laissez-faire, as I call it, because the control is setting the public spaces, defining the plot lines of blocks, creating the rules of volume, and division, creating minimum percentages of certain programs to be realized in order to create a certain balance. This control and laissez-faire between, let's say, Beaux-Arts urbanism and generic urbanism, both in the upscale as well as in the downscale ID in the local context, seems to be a viable approach to create coherence in many diffuse, rapidly developing urban environments, as for instance also in Asian megacities like Beijing or Shanghai's Lujiazhou district, which is very well described and also drawn by himself in this drawing by Peter Rao from Harvard in his book Emergent Architectural Territories in East Asian Cities. You can see that these projects have specifically been developed to create central business districts first, and then by their sheer position in the city and their connectivity, they attract a more nuanced development afterwards, which doesn't mean that you should plan these districts like this. You should of course do it from beforehand in a much more nuanced way. Here you see, for instance, a comparison with this Pudong Island district in the top and the tip of Manhattan on the bottom, and you see what the enormous difference is when a city like Manhattan's tip is built on the plan of old New Amsterdam, and when the planners of La Défense in Paris come to Shanghai to help the Chinese develop this Pudong Island scheme. Let's go to Shenzhen, where we've been working a bit. In 35 years, Shenzhen has transformed from a village into a megacity. This is 1964 on the left, and on the right you see 2011. Same picture. The three official master plans made in 1986, 96 and 2005 were repeatedly overtaken by the impetuous urbanization. As a result of shifts and changes in industrial activity, the emergence of a service economy and the increasing demand for housing, Shenzhen finds itself today in a constant dynamic state of regeneration. When we look upscale at Shenzhen, that is in the context of the Pearl River Delta, and here you see a special drawing we made, namely we projected Switzerland on top of the Pearl River Delta, which is more or less exactly mass matching. You see Basel laying where Canton is, Zurich where Dongguan is, Luzern lies a little bit north of Shenzhen, Bern is Zhuhai, and Macau has no partner. The city looked at upscale is a vital center in an archipelago of megacities, including Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Macau. If we look downscale, we see that Shenzhen contains multiple centers. Here again you see a little bit an impression of the development from 1980 of the whole Pearl River Delta. And here you see Shenzhen with its multiple centers. There were 6 city clusters in the initial 1986 master plan, and many more official and unofficial ones have developed since then. From this perspective, here you see Shenzhen in 1979, when Deng Xiaoping came to see Lee Kuan Yew, and here you see the respective development until 2010. With in yellow the site in the city center where I'm working on. From this perspective, we may wonder how far Shenzhen as a whole is still present, because some of the distinct centers in this otherwise generic city seem, like these centers downscale in Hamburg, to behave as independent urban identities on the level of the whole Pearl River Delta archipelago. These centers vary greatly in size and character. Here you see a couple of these centers characterized in a certain code. It looks like a virus system, as you see. These characters are, for instance, the CBD in Futian, which is in the top picture, a dead Corbusian city, the Luchu district in the east, the emerging waterfront at Sheku in the west, which is middle right picture, the many urban villages where real vibrant life can be found, or OCT Loft, which is a former factory complex, which you see middle left, Intelligently transformed into a creative neighborhood infused with creative industries, culture and cuisine. Armed with the experience of executing large urban projects in Europe, we engaged in an extra large Grand Projèts, the so-called Shenzhen Creative Gateway, of which you see here the plan, consisting of the areas Songgang and Qingzhou in the Luhou district, one of the major centers of Shenzhen. Both have become outdated since the warehouse and storage facilities here cannot fulfill contemporary needs anymore. Here you see an impression of slaughterhouses and warehouses. Here you see the other direction, towards the south, towards Hong Kong. And here you see the transformation of these warehouses in shopping mall offices and also roof terraces with even residential estates on top of them, where people can feel in a local neighborhood. Despite the decreasing importance as a logistics center, in this area rich urban life has established itself at the fringes and gradually infiltrates the area. For the urban regeneration of the total of 540 hectare site, we do not propose a definitive generic master plan, as is common practice in China, but we rather develop a framework for development, a ID for control and laissez-faire, as I said, with a set of strategies connected to it. Here you see our team, the design team of the model, of the plan that we made, depicting an exemplary elaboration of this master plan. And here you see the isometric of it. This framework and this set of strategies establish the direction of development, and they address important structuring and guiding principles while keeping activities going on. The approach is based on the acceptance of the status quo. Instead of one big project, what other companies that applied for this job did, the design introduces a series of projects to be integrated in the existing fabric. So here you see that the whole site is divided into several sub-projects within a multi-directional open street grid. And with consideration for the existing building stock, the powerful road and rail infrastructure, large open spaces, and the topography of the site, the framework wants to perpetuate the urban history of this area as a result of pragmatism ruling over monumentality, which they try to do in other places. The plan, based on detailed typological studies, defines zones of different scale and transformal potential. New programs have been defined to upgrade the area, and there is a densification allowance in order to create sufficient financial means to maintain and to nurse the ground floor. And in this way, we take into account the established fine grain of economic activity in the warehouses and the buildings and the street grids that are already existing in the area. working on Singapore on the moment, I realized how strong its influence was on the development of Shenzhen. It is no coincidence that the Shenzhen Special Economic Zones, that you see on the left-hand side, was established shortly after Deng Xiaoping's visit in 1978 to Lee Kuan Yew's city-state, where he learned that the one-party government can foster a powerful market economy and a sort of socialist program for housing, health and education, providing prosperity for the people without losing control. This is what Deng found very attractive. In the wake of this visit, many Singaporean businesses, planners and architects worked in Shenzhen as investors and consultants to master plans and projects. After Japan, Singapore's planning and architecture became a model for China and other East Asian countries, and now also for countries like Myanmar. Hence the omnipresence in Shenzhen of well-tended green highways, like this one, and high-rise condominium estates like the Shekou waterfront that is now under construction, which has the Singapore waterfront development as a conscious paradigm in all their concepts, from the bathroom in the apartment to the master plan on a larger scale. If we look at Singapore itself in this respect, we cannot put Singapore under this category of Grand Projèts that are creating and organizing and a centralizing polycentrical constellation in unordered urban agglomerations. If you look downscale at Singapore, the city-state can be described in fact as one gigantic Grand Project. Nowhere else in the world does a comparable, comprehensively planned area exist, where urban design exerts detailed control down to the remotest corner of the island. During Deng's visit, Singapore was a modernist utopia, carefully subdivided into functional zones, with large new towns of freestanding housing estates on pilotis in the green, where everything Le Corbusier conceived in Europe, and which didn't work in Europe or America, seemed to work. Today, Singapore has diversified, or is diversifying, and as a result of its transformation towards a service and knowledge economy, its zoning model has evolved into a matryoshka doll of compounds. The outer layer formed by the border, and inside it's a second layer comprised of inaccessible zones like the port, the military zones, and the airport. The center and the innermost zone are formed by malls, condominium estates, HDB projects. If we would like to compare it to Cedric Price's scrambled eggs, which doesn't work, in Singapore, we would maybe depict Singapore as a basket of boiled eggs. But with its new master plan of 2013, Singapore is gradually looking at its town centers and other nuclei as potential mixed-use centralities and typological models that replace the one block, one plot doctrine with hybrid formations where the atomizing network society maybe can find niches. This is Marina Bay South. It's a very luxury project, but it is a very promising project, because if you look at the typology of blocks in relation to the old typology of blocks, this is out of the master plan of the URA, in which you see top right a traditional block where buildings are standing freely and isolated in an open green space, and down You see arrows of connectivity, you see hierarchies, you see relationships between courtyards, ground floors, transitional spaces from which high-rises are coming up. Finally, it is an alternative to models that are processed in the center of Marina Bay, especially in the corporate real estate development zone, where still this one block, one plot, like you see here, is processed, creating an enormous scale jump in relationship even to the existing city center and financial center, creating an underground pedestrian network of in total more than 10 kilometers, connecting these in itself standalone developed blocks. And I hope that, like Canary Wharf and like La Défense, Marina Bay will gradually, in the evolution of its development, develop a map like this, in which a more diverse division of plot lines, a more strong orientation towards the street, and a stronger hierarchy, like the URA also self-introduces in these areas, will become part of these very big urban projects. Finally, looking upscale, Singapore's impact induces strong development across larger distances. You see the area of southern Malaysia, Singapore, and the Riau archipelago. In the three-national region of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the city of Johor and the island of Batam are experiencing a tempestuous urbanization, generating factories, shipyards, agriculture and slums, while the island of Bintan is being colonized with beach resorts, on the right-hand side in blue. Here the political and economic gradient literally generates an archipelago metropolis, but without a transnational planning strategy. The planning strategy stops at the border of Singapore, and every other urbanization activity is on the basis of private initiative and not on the basis of government initiative, except for the selling of water, the border control, and the plan that the new high-speed line is going to be there. So, and in addition, Singapore's footprint through this disparity extends far beyond the region to Penang, Bali, Manado, and Siem Reap, where low-cost aviation systems, telecom networks, banking services, production facilities, and tourist infrastructures forebode the evolution of a global archipelago of central places, a blown-up version of the earlier diagram of Walter Cristaller I showed you. What are the common threads in what I showed you? In each city described, it seems clear that governments are aware of the fact that urbanization is more effectively controlled by visions, policy documents, and intelligent process management than by fixed plans. I observe a shift from detailed master plans towards more open structural visions, and from functional zoning towards flexibility and land use based on political covenant. Under the umbrella of the structural vision, constellations of multiple centralities and traffic arteries, public spaces, mediating between the regional and the local scale, capture the agglomeration. Most of these Grand Projèts also function as mobility interfaces. Downscale, these projects preferably consist of development frameworks steered by a control and laissez-faire approach, in which phases allow for incremental development, and they tend to have a catalytic, generative effect on their surroundings, at least the ones that have been designed later. This approach seems to work in very different contexts, in Europe and in Asia, on larger and on smaller scales. And maybe all of this indicates that this approach contributes to a theory of urbanization governments, not of urbanization and not of planning, but of urbanization governance, although it might come from a pragmatist reaction to the uncontrollability of the urban environment. Thank you very much.
Aren't we lucky to be able to have such erudite and encompassing presentation, and we just sit here and absorb it all. Diplomatic and provocative at the same time, if I may say so. A fun fact about Case that I found out, he's actually at least an honorary or citizen of Southeast Asia. He was born in Yogyakarta.
No, my father.
Oh, your father was born in Yogyakarta. Okay. Well, then, and the story goes that as a child, though, people thought you were Indonesian for some reason. That's right. Okay. Let me introduce now our discussant, good friend and colleague, Lee Min Hee. She's the Director of Research at Singapore Center for Livable Cities. I think many people in the audience know you already. And so CLC is a knowledge nexus, a think tank for livable cities, sustainable cities in Singapore. Lee Min got her degree, her PhD, right, from Harvard University in architecture, and a master's from the National University of Singapore. Prior to joining CLC, she taught at the School of Design and Environment at National University of Singapore, where she led the Urban Studies Research and Teaching Group, and was principal investigator at the Center of Sustainable Asian Cities. Her research is focused on sustainability and its agenda for architecture, urbanism, and public space. She's a project leader at CLC for collaborative research projects, including those with the Urban Land Institute, creating healthy places for active mobility, and something I'd like to know more about, 10 principles for livable high-density cities. Maybe you can fill us in later on that. Lee Min is a very determined person. She told me that, well, at Harvard she actually broke her leg and she was in a cast for a while, but she would walk faster than the handicap van that tried to give her a lift along the way. And that's carried over to Singapore. She's now determined to make Singapore a walkable city. Hopefully not just for people on crutches, but for all of us. And maybe we'll hear more about that too. In the meantime, let me invite Lee Min up to give her comments. Let's welcome her.
So thank you, Case, for your remarkable and erudite lecture, and thanks to the Asia Research Institute, and of course to Mike, my dear friend, for inviting me to be the discussant here tonight. So I hope you bear with me. I'm not going to be able to show you the wonderful slides that Case has been showing you, but I hope you would sort of listen to what I'm saying so that we can have a fruitful discussion later on. So Case eye-opener of a lecture brings to the forefront an important urban phenomena of our time, and these Grand Projèts made possible from the globalization of building and innovative funding methods that have emerged in recent times. The lecture also brings to mind one of my favorite projects by Japanese architect Fumihiko Maki's Hillside Terrace project, which he started in 1967 as his response to the megaform or megastructure discourse, which was very popular in Japan at that time. Built from 1967 to 1992 over a period of 25 years in 6 phases, Hillside Terrace captured the flow of time by engaging with its changing urban context and even creating the urban context itself. It enabled Maki himself to gain a deeper understanding of the idea of collective form, embracing the idea of grandeur and scale without big infrastructures or buildings. I visited the project a few years ago, and it does feel like part of the city rather than apart from the city, and embodies great visual connectivity and public spaces. And here I quote Markey: "Spatial character usually determines what is public in the city. A metropolis can provide overwhelming spaces unavailable in small cities or villages. However, public spaces in cities do not exist just for crowds or communities. They are also places that allow people to enjoy solitude. Our urban spaces become much richer when there are many different layers of public spaces and meanings. In a metropolis, people take strolls just as people in the countryside go to the mountains or rivers. In that way, they are able to establish a special spatial relationship between themselves and portions of the city. The extent to which streets and other public spaces suitable for walking are provided can be considered an effective index in determining the quality of urbanity in the city. Sadly, the contemporary city is being gradually divested of such public character." Close quote. Contrast this development to another development in Asia, the Union Square development in Hong Kong, which was built on reclaimed land in West Kowloon. The project is integrated with the Kowloon metro station as well as bus lines, and built deep into the basement, and altogether encompassing 16 towers of office complexes and high-end apartments. Altogether, the development exceeds 1 million square meters, not square feet, but square meters, and it is as large as the Canary Wharf development that Case showed you earlier in London, and it has nearly 6,000 residential units and almost as many parking lots, a mega mall, and an urban park garden on the podium rooftop. The look and feel of this project, which I visited earlier this year, is one that turns unto itself a mini city from which you may not actually see the light of day, much less set foot in other parts of the city unless you get into the metro and go somewhere else. This brings me to the idea of public space and how integrated such mega projects are with the rest of the city. Such mini cities as the Union Square project in Hong Kong are only integrated with the public transportation system and may actually provide a more direct connection to other parts of the Pearl River Delta, as Case has shown you earlier, and what he refers to as the upscale connection, but does not relate well to its local context, where vistas of the city are only possible from the urban roof garden. An analogy going by Case's earlier mention of the city as an egg. Perhaps it is an egg, but with its hermetically sealed environment, it is an egg with its shell still intact. The thought that Markey may have put into connecting his development with the city and to provide public good through good quality and freely accessible public spaces, or what Case refers to as the downscale contribution of the project to its locality, is indeed a very important aspect of such Grand Projèts. The subject also brings to mind something which the urban scholar Susan Feinstein's study of mega projects in London, Amsterdam and New York, in which she remarked on the striking physical similarity among the schemes and also a convergence embodied in private sector involvement and market orientation. They differ, however, as to whether they provide affordable units and the bringing together of physical and social goals. Her study and comparison of these large projects showed that they are risky for both public and private sector players, and because they are primarily oriented towards profitability, they mostly encompass commercial office buildings, hotels, mega malls, and luxury housing, which may not produce a landscape of good urbanity. Whether the social benefits and public good contributed by these projects outweigh the disamenities such as increased traffic congestion, gentrification of neighborhoods and so on, depends on how much direct government commitment in public benefits have been built in. Feinstein's study also found that the gains in the Netherlands are the greatest, providing affordable housing for the city, while those in the US were the least, as the commercial aspects of the developments dominated the projects. Let me conclude my remarks with some thoughts around the ideas of long-term planning that the Center for Livable Cities, where I work, has been developing. In particular for mega projects in the city, where public-private partnership is essential, it's necessary to think long-term rather than go for short-term gains, and maintain enough flexibility in the implementation of these projects over time so that it develops with the city dynamically and embodies the passing of time. While governments work with markets for such projects, public good should be maintained in notions about affordability and public access, not least public spaces to be enjoyed by all. While it is easy to imagine these projects as self-contained eggs, it would be smart for cities to work with the community as stakeholders for the projects so that these projects would be able to benefit many instead of few, and again, as the analogous egg, become the wellspring of growth in the city, economically, urbanistically, and socially. Thank you.